Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a grand palace or a bustling marketplace, but to a place where whispers became screams, and sanity was a luxury few could afford. You find yourself standing before the imposing, crumbling facade of one of Europe's oldest insane asylums, its very stones exhaling a chilling, silent sigh. The air here feels heavy, thick with the echoes of forgotten despair. A place where those deemed unwell were cast aside, not for healing, but for containment. Imagine the slow, creeping dread that would settle upon you as you were led through its iron gates, knowing that once inside, the world outside might cease to exist for you. It's a reality check that hits hard. These institutions weren't just buildings, they were often places where human dignity withered and vanished. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Is the sun setting, casting long, unsettling shadows where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's truly disturbing journey together. You feel the cold, damp air seeping into your very bones as you stand at the overgrown entrance. The ornate, yet decaying iron gates groan softly as if protesting your presence. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, strangles the ornate stonework, pulling the building slowly back into the earth, but not before it tells its stories. This isn't just an old building. It's a monument to an era when the human mind was a terrifying mystery, and those who deviated from the norm were not understood, but feared. The term madhouse really wasn't far off the mark, as your gaze sweeps across the imposing structure. You notice the lack of conventional windows, or rather, the windows are mere slits, high up, barred, and darkened. They aren't designed to let light in, but to prevent escape. This architectural choice speaks volumes about the primary function of such institutions in centuries past. Custodial care, often masquerading as treatment. People weren't admitted. They were committed. And once committed, their identity often, dissolved, replaced by a diagnosis, a number, and a cell. Historians still argue whether these early asylums were born of genuine, if misguided, medical intent, or simply societal convenience to hide away the inconvenient. You can almost hear the phantom echoes of rattling keys, distant moans, and the shuffling feet of wardens. It makes you wonder, if these walls could talk, what horrors would they truly reveal? Perhaps the same horrors that played out in similar institutions across Europe, each with its own dark legend. It's enough to make you shiver, even wrapped in your coziest blanket. Honestly, if these walls had Yelp reviews, they'd be absolutely brutal. Terrible service, questionable therapies, and the constant screaming really put a damper on the ambience. Just kidding. Mostly that sheer scale of the place is disorienting. It sprawls a labyrinth of wings and courtyards, each one seemingly designed to disorient and isolate. You try to imagine the countless souls who walked these very halls, each one carrying a unique burden, a unique story. But those stories, more often than not, were never heard outside these walls. Fair. They were swallowed by the silence, by the fear, and by the sheer indifference of a society that didn't know, or perhaps didn't want to know, how to deal with the complexities of the human psyche. The very air here feels charged with residual K-emotion, a heavy blanket of forgotten despair that presses down on you, inviting you to listen to its whispers. You can't help but wonder if some of those whispers are still real. As you step further inside, the initial chill deepens, not just from the lack of sunlight, but from the palpable sense of history. You navigate through what must have been the reception area, imagining the terrified faces of new arrivals, stripped of their belongings, their dignity, and often their names. The earliest approaches to mental health were, to put it mildly, less than therapeutic. You see, during the period when many of these European asylums were established, the prevailing belief was that mental illness was a form of moral failing, a sign of demonic possession, or simply a structural defect in the brain that could be corrected through extreme measures. Imagine the treatments you would have endured had you been admitted. Bloodletting, for instance, was a common practice, based on the ancient theory of humors. They believed that an imbalance in bodily fluids caused illness, so they'd simply cut you and drain some blood. Lovely, right? It's enough to make you feel lightheaded just thinking about it. Then there was purging, where powerful laxatives were administered to cleanse the system, and vomiting agents, which probably felt as pleasant as they sound. If you managed to survive those, perhaps you'd be subjected to hydrotherapy, which often involved prolonged exposure to extreme temperatures, like being strapped into a bath of icy water for hours, or scalded with hot water. The idea was to shock the system back to sanity. More often, it just shocked the system into submission. Beyond the physical, there were the psychological therapies. You might have been spun rapidly on a rotary chair, designed to reorient the brain. Sounds fun, like a carnival ride, right? Except the carnival ride was designed to induce extreme nausea and disorientation. Or perhaps the cribs and restraint chairs, which were less about comfort and more about immobilizing patients for days or even weeks. It makes you wonder if their goal was healing, or just ensuring you couldn't cause trouble. Historians still argue whether the extreme nature of these treatments reflected genuine medical ignorance or a more sinister, underlying desire for social control. It's a chilling thought that the very people tasked with your care might have been causing you more harm than good. You trace your fingers along a rough stone wall, feeling the cold seep into your fingertips. There's a peculiar, faint metallic scent in the air here, almost like old iron and something else, something indescribable. Perhaps it's just the decay, or perhaps it's a phantom echo of the very real fear that permeated these halls. It's a sobering thought that for many patients, the cure was often worse than the illness. SIM treatments, like the famous tranquilizing chair, designed by Benjamin Rush in the late 18th century, were meant to reduce pulse and muscular action by restricting movement and placing a box over the head. Sounds like a spa day. The idea of a spa day involves being tied down and suffocated. You can almost hear the soft, frantic breathing of someone confined, the quiet creak of wood under strain. It's hard to imagine the daily terror of living in such an environment, where help often came in the form of further pain or confinement. These early asylum practices weren't just archaic, they were profoundly dehumanizing, stripping away not just freedom, but identity and agency. And you, walking through these ghostly remains, are witnessing the silent testament to countless lives lived and lost in the shadow of treatment. Moving deeper into the asylum, you pass through a long, dim corridor, the air growing colder, heavier. This must have been where the patients' living quarters were, a place where individuality was systematically eroded. You imagine the countless souls who endured endless days and nights within these very walls, their lives reduced to a grim, monotonous cycle of confinement and care. Each patient, no matter their background, was stripped of their identity upon admission, their personal effects confiscated, their names sometimes replaced with numbers. They became simply the mad, categorized and catalogued. Consider the daily routine for a patient here. Awaking to the harsh clang of a bell or the jingle of keys, their days would have been rigidly structured, devoid of personal choice. Meals, often meager and bland, would be served in silence, perhaps in a communal hall under the watchful eyes of wardens. The concept of meaningful activity or therapeutic engagement, as we understand it today, was largely absent. Instead, patients might be put to work on the asylum grounds, performing menial labor, a practice that, while sometimes framed as therapy, often bordered on unpaid servitude. It makes you wonder how much healing actually happened, and how much was just a way to keep them occupied, or even profitable. For many, their only companions were the other patients, equally trapped and often equally distressed. Imagine the cacophony of sounds, distant cries, unidentifiable murmurs, perhaps the occasional outburst. These weren't quiet, sterile environments. They were often chaotic, overwhelming places where the line between sanity and madness blurred even for those meant to be sane. A mainstream historical fact about these institutions is that overcrowding was a rampant and persistent issue, exacerbating poor sanitation and contributing to the rapid spread of diseases, both physical and mental. It's hard to foster recovery, quote, when you're crammed into a space with dozens of others, suffering and perhaps dying. You press your hand against a cold, grimy wall and swear you can feel a faint vibration, a residual tremor of despair. It's the kind of place where even the silence feels loud, filled with unspoken stories. A quirky tidbit about some of these older asylums is the existence of what were known as padded cells, not for comfort, but to prevent self-harm in agitated patients. While seemingly humane, these often became places of extreme isolation, amplifying the very distress they were meant to alleviate. Imagine being in a room where every surface absorbed sound, leaving you alone with your own fractured thoughts. It's enough to make you feel a little stir-crazy just thinking about it. Honestly, if you were feeling a bit off before going in, you'd probably come out with a whole new set of issues. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of such restrictive environments was primarily for patient safety or simply a cost-effective method of control in an era when mental illness was poorly understood and often feared. The debates highlight the profound ethical dilemmas at the heart of these institutions. You walk past what might have been individual cells, their heavy wooden doors still ajar, revealing small, dark spaces. You try to picture a person's life unfolding within such confines, the hope, the despair, the slow surrender. It's a chilling reminder that these weren't just architectural structures. They were the silent witnesses to countless lost lives, their stories swallowed by the cold, unforgiving stone. As you continue your exploration, you can't help but notice how the very architecture of the asylum seems designed to amplify a sense of dread and confinement. This wasn't just a building. It was a carefully constructed cage. The corridors are long and narrow, seemingly endless, with high ceilings that dwarf you, creating an oppressive sense of insignificance. Light, where it exists, is sparse and cold, filtered through grimy, barred windows or non-existent altogether in deeper sections. It's like stepping into a waking nightmare, a feeling many patients must have experienced every single day. Consider dumb materials themselves. Rough-hewn stone, unforgiving brick, heavy iron, everything speaks of durability and immovability. There's little in the way of warmth or comfort. The walls seem to absorb all sound, leaving an unsettling quiet broken only by your own footsteps and the distant creaks of the aging structure. You imagine the maddening echo of a single scream reverberating through these empty halls, slowly fading into an even more profound silence. It's truly a place where silence wasn't golden. It was terrifying. Honestly, the interior decorator here must have been going through a really dark phase. Let's go with early oppressive and unrelenting despair for the aesthetic. A mainstream historical fact about many of these large purpose-built asylums is their panopticon-inspired designs, even if not strictly The idea was often to allow a single supervisor to observe multiple patients without the patients knowing if they were being watched. This constant surveillance, whether real or imagined, was intended to enforce discipline and control. You can feel that residual sense of being watched, even now. It's a subtle prickle on the back of your neck. You notice how few doors lead outside, and those that do are massive, reinforced, and clearly meant to be impenetrable. There are no welcoming courtyards or gardens designed for therapeutic strolls. Instead, any outdoor spaces would have been walled in, high and forbidding, ensuring no glimpse of freedom, no hint of the world beyond. This physical isolation mirrored the profound social isolation of the patients. They were not just removed from society, they were erased from it. A quirky tidbit is that some asylums, in their early design phases, even incorporated elements like underground tunnels or concealed passageways for staff to move unnoticed, or for the discreet removal of those who perished. It paints a picture of a place built not just for care, but for secrecy and control. You run your hand along a cold, damp patch on the wall, and the chill feels deeper than mere temperature. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for such grand fortress-like architecture was truly patient safety and long-term care, or simply a convenient, permanent solution for segregating undesirables from the general public. The debate continues, leaving a lingering question about the true intentions behind these imposing structures. You feel a strange sense of claustrophobia, a phantom pressure in your chest, as if the walls themselves are slowly closing in around you.